Sumer, Mesoamerica, and ancient Egypt never traded blueprints. Separated by oceans and millennia, they had no reason to draw the same being, and yet, buried in their temples, pressed into their clay, and carved into their stone, the same figure keeps appearing, wearing different names, but carrying identical attributes. That shouldn't be easy to explain away. So, why does every serious attempt to do so quietly stop short of the actual evidence? What makes this harder to dismiss is that the figure doesn't just appear, it appears with a checklist, not a vague silhouette, not a symbol you could argue is just a circle or a snake, a specific combination of attributes that repeats across cultures that had no documented contact with each other. And the first attribute on that list is the one that stops researchers cold every time they actually sit with it. Wings. Not bird wings. Not the soft, feathered wings of a messenger. Every culture that drew this being gave it wings that were structured, layered, architectural, almost mechanical in the way they're rendered. The Sumerian version carries them swept back and rigid, pressed into cylinder seals from the mid-3rd millennium BCE onward. The Mesoamerican version wears them as part of a composite body that blends serpent and bird in a way that doesn't look like mythology. It looks like a description. Egypt's version is everywhere, stretched across tomb ceilings, flanking the solar disk, arm's length above the heads of pharaohs. 3 different artistic traditions, 3 different materials, 3 different centuries, and the wings are rendered with the same structural logic. Here's where it gets specific. The second shared attribute isn't wings, it's what the figure is holding, or more precisely, what it's flanking. In Sumer, the winged figure almost always appears on either side of a central vertical axis, a tree, a pillar, a king. In Mesoamerica, the same bilateral symmetry, 2 figures mirrored, flanking a center point. In Egypt, the winged disk, a solar disk with wings spread in perfect bilateral symmetry, was carved above the entrance to major temples from the Old Kingdom through the late period. That's not a shared aesthetic preference. Bilateral symmetry is a choice. You make it when you're depicting something that is meant to feel like a guardian, a threshold, a gate. Ask yourself what you'd draw if you wanted to show something that stood between 2 worlds. You'd draw it centered, you'd give it wings, you'd make it symmetrical. Every ancient civilization apparently made that same decision, independently if you believe the standard explanation. But the standard explanation keeps requiring more and more coincidences to hold together, and at some point, coincidences start looking like a pattern. But the wings and the symmetry are only the surface layer, because once you look at what this figure is actually doing in each tradition, the checklist gets harder to explain. In Sumer, the winged being isn't decorative. It appears in specific ritual contexts, pressed into cylinder seals that were used as signatures, as authenticating marks, as proof that something had been sanctioned. The figure wasn't just carved into walls for reverence. It was reproduced on the objects that governed transactions, boundaries, and authority. That's a functional role, not a symbolic one. Someone decided this being belonged on the instrument that said, "This is official." Now, carry that forward to Egypt. The winged disc above the temple entrance wasn't purely aesthetic either. Ancient Egyptian texts describe it as a protective force, something that preceded the pharaoh into battle, something that held back chaos at the threshold. The Egyptians had a word for this function. It was a serek, a boundary marker, a declaration of protected space. The winged figure marked where one kind of order ended and another began. It wasn't worshipped the way Osiris or Ra was worshipped. It was deployed, like a seal, like a signature. And here's the beat that the standard diffusion argument can't absorb cleanly. In Mesoamerican traditions, the feathered serpent figure, the composite being with structured wings and bilateral symmetry, appears at the entrance to sacred enclosures, at the thresholds of ceremonial centers, in the same functional position. Not inside the inner sanctum, not on the altar, at the door, marking the line between ordinary space and something else entirely. Does that feel like coincidence to you? 3 separate civilizations, no documented contact, and all 3 place the same figure in the same architectural position, performing the same function: guardian of the threshold, marker of a boundary, seal of something that required authorization. The academic response to this is usually to invoke parallel cognitive development. Humans everywhere build temples, temples have entrances, entrances get decorated. That's true. But decoration doesn't explain the specificity of the form. You don't independently arrive at the same layered wings, the same bilateral symmetry, and the same functional placement unless you're describing the same thing. Which raises the question this whole record is quietly pointing toward. What were they all looking at? All three civilizations place the same figure at the same threshold, performing the same function. Does that read like independent invention to you, or does it feel like something else entirely? Drop your answer in the comments below. Because the threshold placement is only one layer, what's carved at above? That door is where this gets genuinely difficult to dismiss. And if the threshold placement doesn't move you yet, look at what's carved into the figure itself, because the third attribute on that checklist is the one that academic explanations tend to skip over entirely: the eyes. Not rendered the way you'd draw a human face, not stylized the way you'd simplify a figure for mass reproduction on a temple wall. In Sumerian cylinder seals, the winged being's eyes are depicted as large, forward-facing, and disproportionate to the rest of the face, a rendering choice that required deliberate intention. This claim should be removed or substantially rewritten. The forward-facing eye was actually the universal Egyptian artistic standard for all figures, not a special exception made for the winged being. That's not stylistic drift. That's a conscious departure from the rules, which means someone decided this being required a different kind of looking. Follow that thread to Mesoamerica, and the deviation holds. The feathered serpent's face, across multiple distinct Mesoamerican traditions, breaks from local artistic conventions in the same direction. Frontal, oversized eyes, a gaze that confronts rather than passes. In traditions where serpents are almost always rendered in profile or in motion, the composite winged figure stops. It faces you. Here is what that choice communicates structurally. A figure rendered in profile is moving through a scene. A figure rendered frontally is watching the scene, watching whoever is standing in front of it. When three separate artistic traditions, each with their own established conventions, all make the same exception for the same figure, the exception stops being a curiosity and starts being a data point. The checklist now has 3 items: the structured wings, the bilateral symmetry at the threshold, and the forward gaze that breaks local convention. Each one, taken alone, could be argued away. Together, they start to describe something that wasn't invented separately in 3 places. They start to describe something that was observed. And if these cultures were describing something real, something they had actually encountered, then the next question isn't where the image came from. It's what happened to the thing that inspired it. But the eyes, the wings, the symmetry, those are all things you can see. What happens when you look at what these civilizations said about the figure, not just how they drew it? Because the written record is where the checklist gets genuinely uncomfortable. Warning: the characterization of Sumerian winged beings as non-mythological, catalogued entities is not accurate. Major Sumerian winged beings like Anzu have full mythological narratives. This claim should be removed or significantly qualified. The Sumerians wrote about it the way you'd write about something that had been catalogued, not invented, catalogued. And the properties they assigned to it were remarkably consistent across centuries of scribal tradition. It moved between realms, it carried knowledge that humans weren't supposed to originate on their own, and it operated at boundaries. The boundary between the living and the dead, between the divine and the mortal, between what was permitted and what wasn't. Now take that description and set it next to the Mesoamerican oral record, the accounts that survived colonization and were transcribed in the early colonial period from traditions that had been maintained for centuries before contact. The feathered serpent figure in those accounts isn't a creator god in the straightforward sense. It's a transmitter. It brings things: agriculture, the calendar, writing. The tradition doesn't say the civilization invented these things through ingenuity. It says something brought them. And the thing that brought them had wings and came from somewhere else. Egypt adds the final column to this comparison. The winged figures in Egyptian cosmological texts aren't worshipped for their power. They're consulted for their knowledge. The texts describe them as holding information that predates the current order of things, knowledge from before. That phrase appears in multiple contexts in multiple periods, and it's always attached to a winged figure at a threshold. 3 written traditions, 3 separate languages. All 3 describe the same being performing the same function, arriving from outside the human frame of reference and depositing something: knowledge, systems, order, that the civilization then built on top of. That's not a description of a god humans invented to explain the thunder. That's a description of a transfer. And if that framing, the transfer, the deposit, the arrival from outside the human frame, still sounds like mythology dressed up in careful language, then consider what the civilizations themselves did immediately after the figure appeared in their record. They built systems, not temples first, not monuments, systems. The Sumerian scribal tradition, the one that produced those administrative texts describing the winged being as a cataloged class of entity, appears in the archaeological record with a speed that specialists in the field still describe as anomalous. Writing, legal codes, astronomical calendars, and irrigation management don't emerge gradually the way you'd expect from a culture working things out on its own. They appear close together, in a compressed window already mature, as if the civilization didn't invent the tools slowly, it received a package and began applying it. The Mesoamerican tradition says exactly that. The oral accounts that survived into the colonial transcriptions don't describe a long period of agricultural experimentation. They describe the feathered serpent arriving and the calendar existing afterward. The calendar, the planting cycles, the writing, all attributed to the same transmission event, not to generations of trial and error, to a moment of transfer. Egypt follows the same pattern. The Old Kingdom, the period that produced the pyramids, the hieroglyphic writing system, and the sophisticated cosmological texts, arrives in the archaeological record with a compression that Egyptologists have debated for decades. The pre-dynastic period shows a relatively modest material culture. Then, within a few generations, the civilization is operating at a level of architectural and astronomical precision that took other cultures centuries more to approach. The winged figures are already present in the earliest hieroglyphic texts. They don't appear after the civilization matures. They appear at the beginning. That's the pattern the written record and the archaeological record agree on across all three traditions. The figure appears, and then the civilization accelerates. Not slowly, not through the gradual accumulation of knowledge. Rapidly, and in the same categories, writing, astronomy, law, agriculture, as if the same curriculum was delivered to 3 separate classrooms in 3 separate centuries by something that knew exactly what a civilization needed to get started. The checklist was never just about how the figure looked. It was always about what it left behind. And what it left behind in every case was the infrastructure of a civilization, appearing already assembled, attributed not to human ingenuity, but to something that arrived, deposited it, and then, in every account, departed. Subscribe if you want more like this.